Hello everyone, welcome to South News. I'm Afaf Kanja. Joining us today is the permanent representative of Sri Lanka to the United Nations, Dr. Palitha Kohona. Thank you so much for being here, Ambassador. So
Thank you for inviting me here, Afaf.
Always a pleasure seeing you. Thank you. If I may, if you will allow me, Ambassador, I would really like to start with the tough questions. Sri Lanka will be hosting the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting next year, 2013. With this, however, comes concern, even some sort of critical and harsh criticism, rather. And this is based on allegations of war crimes during Sri Lanka's civil war. Now, we understand there has been rapid reconstruction, rapid reconciliation, yet the issue stands at hand. If you will, tell us what the government is doing to really put this issue at rest.
But you have asked me a number of questions, actually. First and foremost, the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Colombo. Yes, we will be hosting it in 2013. The offer was made when the CHOGM was held in Kampala, in Uganda. And I'm very happy that now the heads of government have accepted the fact that Sri Lanka will hold this next year. We are ready for it, and we hope that all heads will turn up for this event. The issues that are being raised, of course, have nothing to do with the Commonwealth Heads of Government. If you look at the history of CHOGM, there have been much bigger issues with regard to countries that hosted this event. None of those issues resulted in the hosting, the venue of the event, or anything else being changed. So we are a little concerned that events associated with the ending of Sri Lanka's conflict are now being highlighted as we get ready to host the CHOGM. Mainly the allegation is that there were violations of human rights and war crimes. Of course, these things happen, or are alleged to have happened 2.5 years ago. The conflict ended 2.5 years ago. In fact, since the 18th of May 2009, not a single bomb has exploded in Sri Lanka. Not a single bullet has been fired in anger. And nevertheless, there are certain interested elements who are very keen on scratching that old wound and keeping the past alive. The past agony and the pain is still being resurrected for reasons that have very little to do with the country as it is today or with the country's future. Sri Lanka had a terrorist confrontation or terrorist challenge which lasted over 27 years. During that period, not a single day or a single week went by without a suicide bomb being exploded somewhere. Hundreds, thousands of innocent children, women, old people, and other civilians died in the process. Religious people were killed. People who dissented with the terrorists were just brutally massacred. For example, the former Indian Prime Minister, Rajiv Gandhi, was blown up by these terrorists because he did not endorse what they were doing. And he was the head of a foreign government, not in Sri Lanka. This was our experience for 27, 28 years. Now that period is well and truly behind us. It's over. The government has in place, as you quite rightly pointed out, a very well thought out program for reconciling the people, healing the wounds, and moving the country forward. And this is happening. Today, if you go to Sri Lanka and ask anybody whether they're happy with the current situation, they might not say that they are delirious, but certainly there's hardly anybody who will say they're unhappy with the current situation. People are moving around freely, children go to school, people go to the temples, their churches. The economy is growing at an unprecedented rate. It's over 8%. Unemployment is down to a manageable 5%. And with the economy growing at 8% and unemployment and inflation down to around 5%, the country is actually getting richer. You can see it all around you. New buildings are coming up, new roads are being built, harbors, airports. Everywhere you see progress, tangible progress. And the people, whether they belong to the Tamil minority or the majority Sinhalese, seem to be uniformly content with what is going on. Of course, like anybody, they will have things to complain about. They'll complain about the price of food, or they'll complain about the price of bus fares, etc. And that's a good thing. People must complain so that they can get their condition better, improved. But things are moving in the right direction. Tourism, which just went downhill for 30 years, has suddenly revived. Over the last 2 years, the tourist intake has gone up by over 50%. Now our bigger problem is not a lack of tourists, but a shortage of hotel rooms. And in this context, I must also add that some of the bigger hotel chains in the world are beginning to show interest in Sri Lanka. Shangri-La, which is a major hotel establishment based in Singapore, has just moved into the country with a $500 million investment. Aman is already there. And then I understand that Marriott is also moving into Sri Lanka with not one, but a number of properties. So the economy is doing well, tourism is doing well, the reconciliation process is going ahead satisfactorily. We also appointed a Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission in 2010 in August. And this commission has submitted its report to the President. The report was submitted in December last year. It was tabled in Parliament. Now it's an open document. What the government has said categorically, and I must emphasize this, that if wherever there are recommendations made by the Commission, the government will implement them. So there are recommendations with regard to disappearances. There are recommendations with regard to the gruesome footage that you saw on Channel 4. In fact, the Commission has said they have their doubts about the authenticity of the footage. But they have said in order to clear the name of the people involved once and forever, there should be a proper investigation, and this must be resolved. And if there are any questions with regard to the propriety of the acts undertaken by individuals, then the government must take legal action against them.
And please clarify this for me. Has the government categorically denied these allegations?
What the government has said, it's not a question of allegations in general. There are specific allegations made in the Channel 4 video. Yes. The government has said the video itself is not reliable because it has hired very high-level specialists from Australia, from the United States, Professor Ifantis from the US, and they've all cast doubts about the authenticity of the video. There is even a suggestion, and it's in the report, you can read it, that some parts of the video were actually staged. And the motive to bring discredit to the government of Sri Lanka and keep the pain, the fire burning. It's absolutely, I cannot understand the motive, but this is it. But the Commission has addressed that issue and has said if actual wrongdoing emerges from a proper investigation, then the government must take legal action against those who were responsible. And I think that's the proper way to go. And personally, I think in a country where the rule of law prevails, if an individual crosses the line, whether he's a soldier or not, then he must come under the full force of the law. So far, we don't have any evidence. At the time when the Commission was sitting, it invited Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and the International Crisis Group to come to Sri Lanka, go before the Commission, and present whatever evidence they had. They declined. But they have not stopped going around the world with the supposed evidence that is in their possession, and doing a lot of propaganda, negative propaganda on Sri Lanka.
Like you said, moving ahead. Let's talk about it. It's a campaign to expedite the determination of claims on the seabed. Of course, I think this, of course, pertains to the Indian Ocean seabed, right? So my understanding is that the process is moving along rather fluidly. There aren't any, for example, maritime disputes with neighboring countries or even any external interference. Is this the case today? Where is the progress today? And more importantly, how is this going to benefit, or how can this benefit Sri Lanka's economic revival?
Sri Lanka is a small island, and when the Law of the Sea Convention was being negotiated in the 70s, 80s, Sri Lanka was given a special exemption from the rules applicable to the seabed, because just to the southeast and northwest of Sri Lanka, a huge deposit of sediment had accumulated over millions of years, coming down from the major Indian rivers like the Ganges, etc. And this bed of sediment, in places 10 kilometers thick, abuts Sri Lanka. So the exemption that was given would enable Sri Lanka to claim a huge portion of this bed of sediment, now known as the Bengal fan, as its own seabed. Sri Lanka has lodged a claim before the Law of the Sea authorities.
At the UN.
At the UN.
Yes.
It is being processed, and we have been campaigning at the United Nations to have our claim processed as soon as possible. In this context, you also highlighted the fact that we do not have border disputes with our closest neighbor, India. Our border was demarcated in 1976, and it stays the same. And fortunately, all our neighbors are far away enough that we don't have any border disputes.
Good.
So what we now need to do is to get the seabed, the Law of the Sea Continental Shelf Commission to determine that our claim is an appropriate claim to be endorsed. And once it is done, then we will have a bilateral with India to divide up the seabed accordingly. And how would that help us? The exploitable landmass of Sri Lanka will expand by a factor of 23 as a result of our claim being endorsed by the United Nations. So it will be a vast area of the seabed. And you know what benefits the seabed can bring you these days. It could be minerals, it could be gas, it could be oil. In fact, already we have struck gas on the western side of the island. So economically, this could bring us huge benefits. As in any event, being an island state with the entire Indian Ocean at our doorstep, we have access to the fisheries resources of the ocean, which up to now we have not exploited adequately. And then, of course, being an island in the sun, I talked about this earlier, we have 900 miles of pristine beaches.
Which brings me to my next question, Ambassador, and that is sustainable tourism. Sri Lanka's got to be one of the most beautiful places on earth. I mean, from your tropical rainforest to these pristine beaches, etc. I mean, it's the weather is just amazing, wet and warm. You know, just it's perfect, right? And I'm wondering, post-conflict, how has tourism, you said 50%, I think, increased? Your problem is actually for capacity now. Tell us what you're doing in terms of sustainable tourism and even direct investment.
You made an interesting point earlier about the beauty of the country. There were travelers who came to Sri Lanka over the centuries who made exactly the same comment. Ibn Battuta, the traveler Moor from Tangier, he came to Sri Lanka in the 13th century. When he saw the island, he said, "This must be where Adam landed." It is so beautiful. And then it was also said that it was the brightest pearl in the string of pearls around Queen Victoria's neck. So we've been talked about for centuries, millennia in fact. And it is very important that we continue to encourage visitors the way those visitors came thousands of years ago. And we're doing that. And today the emphasis on sustainable tourism, tourism that will not only use our potential intelligently, but ensure that potential remains for the future. So there are stringent rules regarding the conservation of the coastlines, conservation of the rivers, the waterfalls, etc. Sri Lanka also is a country that is very conscious of its forest cover. For a country that is only 25,000 square miles in size, that's about 65,000 square kilometers, already 22% of the country is under forest cover. The government actually plans to increase this to 30, despite the fact that we have a population of 20 million. Hopefully this population will not grow that much more, but it's 20 million. So we share this, 20 million people share this country with the forest and the forest dwellers. We also have, amazingly, 5,700 wild elephants in that country. That's the biggest herd, concentrated herd of wild elephants in Asia. You go to any other bigger Asian countries, you wouldn't see such a concentrated herd. So we preserve the wildlife, we preserve our natural habitat, and we preserve our forests. It's very important because it also is a source of income through tourism. Sri Lanka also, this has to be mentioned, is also a calving ground for whales. So within 2 hours of seeing the biggest land mammal, you can see the biggest sea mammal. Within an hour and a half or 2 hours of the southwestern coast, you can see frolicking whales at the biggest of them. So it's so all this is what we got from nature, and I think we will continue to use these for the benefit of the people in such a way that the wildlife also will remain where they are.
You know, I have to ask you then, we've got to talk about climate change for a moment. I understand that your key agriculture export is amazing tea, right? It's quality teas that you guys export from Sri Lanka. But climate change, as you shared with me earlier, you're already seeing it. People there are already seeing a difference in the weather, the inconsistent or the varying rather rains and things like that. How is this impacting your most valuable exports, such as the quality teas? And what is Sri Lanka doing in terms of climate change mitigation strategies, and what, more importantly, I think at this point, with the upcoming United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development, what does Sri Lanka want to see come out of these negotiations in June?
First and foremost, the question of the tea. Tea remains one of our major exports, and we export quality tea. And for tea to maintain its quality, you need to have rainfall at the right time, the mist, the sunshine, and a whole range of the cloud cover. The whole range of factors have to combine. And also, you don't need that much rain when the leaves are plucked. We do the plucking by hand, not by machinery, because the tea grows on very steep hillsides. So if climate change does happen, our tea industry could be affected due to lack of rain, the absence of mist, etc. So it's very important that we do whatever we can to contain the descent towards climate change. So what does Sri Lanka do internally? We have adopted fairly stringent regulations with regard to conserving our nature. I talked about one already, maintaining our forest cover. But as a small island state, we can't deal with climate change on our own. It has to be a global effort, because it's just really impossible for a small island to impact on what is going on now. So the major goal is that greenhouse gas emissions are limited to a certain level, and so that the global warming trend is maintained at a level that does not impact on the polar ice caps, sea levels, and weather patterns. It's a very complex demand, but as human beings, we need to address these things methodically. There's no doubt, according to the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that the globe is warming, and largely due to human-induced activities. And so it is very important that these human-induced activities do not continue to contribute to global warming. As we talked about already, global warming will result in the polar ice caps melting, the glaciers melting, and sea levels rising further. Salinity invading to delta areas, coastal fisheries being decimated because the breeding grounds get affected, and tourism also being affected, because you need beaches for tourism, you need harbors, you need mooring areas, etc. All these things will be affected by sea level rise and global warming. So we need to do something specific, something quick, in order to arrest the global warming. Sri Lanka's goals with regard to Rio Plus 20 are modest, but we know that we share these goals with many countries. We ourselves hope that the Green Fund will be established quickly to assist smaller countries in their adaptation efforts, so that countries that are threatened by sea level rise, weather patterns changing, etc., could take measures to adapt to the changes. And that is going to be costly. We've been told that by the year 2020, there will be a fund of $100 billion available for this. But up to now, we also know that the sources of funding have not been identified. We have got a vague formulation called new and innovative sources of funding. So what that means, I really don't know. So we need to get the funding, and the funding is there. The rich countries who actually occupied the global carbon space for so long, whose activities over the last 100 years resulted in greenhouse gas emissions increasing and the globe warming, I believe must take a greater responsibility in assisting those who do not have the resources to adjust to the changing circumstances, and also, very importantly, I think, to help them to develop using a different model. What went wrong, in my view, over the last 100 years or more was that we followed a model that didn't really pay attention to the damage that was being done to the environment.
And I have to add to that, and I have one final question before we run out of time, Ambassador. We were in Bangladesh, and the SG was there, and the former president of Costa Rica was quoting an IAEA report saying that unless something is done now, it will be too late to reverse the damage. By 2017 is the deadline, and especially for small island states, the Pacific Islands, because you're already seeing the changes. My final question to you, Ambassador, is a personal one. What is your greatest challenge as an advocate for Sri Lanka and its people?
My greatest challenge is to counter the adverse publicity that Sri Lanka seems to receive incessantly in the global arena, whether it is from the non-governmental entities or from even certain governments. We seem to be exposed to a lot more adverse publicity than many other countries who have gone through almost identical circumstances.
Why do you think that's the case?
One reason for this is that we have a large migrant community from the group that supported the Tamil Tigers in Sri Lanka. And they are well resourced, so they use their resources in a way that the government of Sri Lanka cannot match. According to Jane's journal Strategic Studies, there was a time when they were collecting over $300 million a year for the war, to support the war effort. And most of that money is still there because the war was lost, the champions are gone. So now this money is being used to finance campaigns, rightly or wrongly, to bring discredit to the government and the people of Sri Lanka. So that is my biggest challenge, to create a better image of Sri Lanka, an image of a country that really did not get involved in the type of activities that it is supposed to have, alleged to have got involved in. And what is more important, it is a country that is moving rapidly forward, giving opportunities to all of its people, treating all of its citizens with dignity, and where every child has a future to look forward to and a dream to dream.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you for joining us here on South South News. I'm Afaf Kanja. We'll see you soon.